So Jacob Zuma's lawyers are accusing the courts of changing the rules when it comes to the former president's cases. Let me bring in a senior legal journalist, Karyn Maughan, to chat to us also about this constant accusation that a lot of these judges are biased against the former president. Karyn, thank you so much for making time. Let's start with what transpired in court today. It seems it was the battle of physical and virtual presence today in the Pietermaritzburg High Court. Just remind us of really was at the core of those arguments by Zuma's lawyers.
Jacob Zuma's lawyers are essentially suggesting that a virtual hearing of his application for a special plea, which the state contends can be decided with through oral argument, it would essentially violate his rights to a fair trial. They're saying that the Constitution, the law makes it clear that an accused person must be physically present in court unless there's specific exceptional circumstances. They're saying Jacob Zuma has been limited in his ability to consult with his lawyers, which will influence his fair trial rights. And they're essentially saying there's absolutely no prejudice to the National Prosecuting Authority if this case is postponed, for example, for 3 weeks in order for the manifest, violence within KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, but specifically KZN, to dissipate. Also for the Constitutional Court to potentially rule on whether or not Jacob Zuma should remain in prison after he applied for a rescission of its judgment that he be imprisoned for 15 months for contempt. So they're essentially saying there's no harm to anyone if he's given that 3 weeks postponement. And they're saying that they're concerned about the NPA's stance in opposing the case. The NPA, of course, saying that a virtual hearing is an absolutely acceptable, legitimate legal format for this argument to take place. They say there's absolutely no basis for Zuma to get an acquittal through a special plea, and the court should just outright dismiss this application without referring it to oral evidence, which of course is what Jacob Zuma is advocating for.
Yeah, I mean, optics also sometimes matter when even matters are being argued in court. What did you make of Advocate Masuku when he was, trying to probably prove a point that we've got limitations in terms of consulting with junior staff. We've got limitations in terms of also consulting with the former president. He asked for a postponement for about 10 minutes because he said, I need to consult. Do you think that was to perhaps indicate that, you see, these are the limitations we're going to have if we continue with this trial with the former president following proceedings virtually?
I think the key issue here is that at this point, there's no indication from the state that they want to necessarily run the actual criminal trial on a virtual format. I think that would be potentially problematic. Certainly the defense indicating that they believe the state, for example, intended to lead certain witnesses who, for example, are in London. I mean, I'm aware of at least one witness in that situation, and that they would have a fundamental problem with that. But the state's contention in pushing for this special plea application to be decided now through a virtual platform is simply that, we're not calling witnesses, we're arguing. And you and I, a number of other journalists, have witnessed in the civil context, for instance, with the public protector's litigation, with a number of cases, other virtual hearings have become very commonplace. Dali and Porfo, of course, arguing that this is a criminal trial. It can't be viewed within the ambit of a civil trial. Jacob Zuma's fair trial rights will be compromised, and very much, seeking to undermine any suggestion that, the existence of COVID-19, the regulations that have been put in place, the directives from the Office of the Chief Justice in the light of the violence that has affected, the courts in KZN, that there was any other option but a real-life hearing of this case, and that a virtual hearing was simply unacceptable. I think the questions at the end were very interesting for me because we don't know what the situation will be like in 3 weeks' time, and certainly it might not be a case where we don't know if the violence will have dissipated, or indeed whether, as Mpofu has suggested, Jacob Zuma will at that stage be out of prison.
Yeah, let's get to the claim that the former president has been making consistently. Once this is dealt with, this particular matter, before the trial even starts. There will be an application then for recusal, right? Zuma has accused advocate Billy Downer of being biased against him. There's a long list of people that the former president has accused of being biased against him. The list must be long now.
Well, I mean, it goes beyond that, Clement. He's not just saying that Billy Downer lacks the independence and impartiality to prosecute him. He says the entire NPA is guilty of misconduct because of the way that they've treated him, which he says is illustrated by the spy tapes, the discussion over when he would be charged in the run-up or aftermath of the 2007 Polokwane elective conference, which, of course, Jacob Zuma won. He has made allegations, for example, against Thuli Madonsela. He suggested that, definitely during the Zondo inquiry, that, there were certain suspicions over the way in which she conducted her investigation into him. She sat with him for 4 hours attempting to get answers about his relationship with the Guptas, his son's business dealings, did not succeed in that. And, of course, that led ultimately to the Commission of Inquiry being established that is now chaired by Raymond Zondo. Zondo is another person who Jacob Zuma claims is too biased and lacks impartiality and cannot be allowed to seek his evidence on the testimony given by 30-plus witnesses implicating him in state capture, corruption, and the manifest looting of the state. And then, obviously we have that extraordinary situation where in the Constitutional Court, he is arguing that the Constitutional Court should not have found him guilty of contempt for defying its order to appear before Zondo and answer questions, should have in fact referred the matter to the National Prosecuting Authority. The very same National Prosecuting Authority that Jacob Zuma contends is too biased. So it does seem that there is a fundamental issue here, and it's really primarily about anyone who requires Jacob Zuma to at least account for his conduct being accused of bias. And I think that is something that will play out, in the months to come as this trial actually runs.
Yeah, and I wonder if we'll ever have someone who will be impartial enough, right, and not have bias to hear any matter against the former president. Just lastly, Karyn, tomorrow is the judgment. If the judge dismisses the application for postponement, does it mean the matter then continues to be heard almost immediately and the former president will follow virtually?
Well, obviously the judge has suggested that he may actually just give an order. It's not without the bounds of possibility that he just says, look, we'll postpone for 3 weeks and allows that. If, in fact, he chooses not to do that and says, I'm dismissing this and I'll provide reasons later, then the special plea must go ahead. What Jacob Zuma and his lawyers do in the aftermath of that decision remains to be seen. But if they choose not to try and challenge what would, many legal commentators would say would be a very interlocutory decision that they should abide by, then we could see all kinds of other postponements emanating from that hearing.